I used to sleep under my bed as a kid. Around the summer of 1994, my dad and I moved from our cozy home in Tennessee to Louisiana. My mother had passed away earlier the past year. My dad thought it would be good to start fresh somewhere, so he got a new job and put me into a new school. Though I wasn't thrilled about leaving my friends and family behind, it was really for the best. We didn't take the loss very well, but we tried to move on with our lives for her. My dad tried to support us. I know it must have been hard being a single parent to a 10-year-old daughter, but he really tried. He was hit so hard financially that we had to sell everything. He mourned so deeply he couldn't go to work and eventually lost his job. I tried to be there for my dad, but he never made it seem like things were that bad. He still tried to give me everything while he had the bare minimum. A couple of months later, my dad's cousin had offered him work at a shipyard in Louisiana, and the rest was history. We packed up what little we had and made our way towards a new beginning. We stayed with his cousin for a month or so until my dad finally found a place that he could afford, which I was so thankful for. I loved my dad's family, but his cousin had 4 boys, and it was just so crowded. I was so excited for us to have our own space together, just me and him. I would be lying if I didn't say I wasn't just a bit disappointed. It was nothing like our old home, but beggars can't be choosers. It was in the middle of nowhere. A small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom shack with faded white paint on old wood with broken maroon shutters on cracked windows. Our new home was surrounded by dead grass. Our only neighbors were acres away, and the town was almost a 45-minute drive away. My dad guaranteed that this place was a steal, though I wondered who would have wanted to steal this in the first place. Before entering our new home, my dad insisted on covering my eyes. He giggled as he yelled, "Surprise!" as our footsteps creaked onto the wooden flooring. It was quite a surprise indeed. Before us was an old floral pattern couch in front of a dusty television set. In the corner, a dirty kitchen and a small hallway leading to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. It wasn't perfect, but again, I was mostly excited to be there with my dad. There wasn't much to explore, so I unpacked my things into my new bedroom. My feet sank into the musty beige carpet as I entered the bedroom. It was odd to me that there was still furniture here. In my room, there was a small black dresser vanity, a brown door to an empty closet with a metal chain hanging down from a light fixture, and a tall brown wooden framed bed. After unpacking a bit, I climbed onto the bed. It was white sheets with dark red blankets. My body sunk into the mattress. It was surprisingly comfy as the fatigue from another move washed over me. I rolled around onto the other side of the bed. I was caught off guard by a deep dip that was on the right side of the mattress that was near the window. I jumped off and ran my hands over the bed. It was completely flat. My dad shouted from the kitchen to call me over for dinner, breaking me from my confusion. The rest of the night went along normally. We had our dinner, cleaned up, talked a bit, remembered Mom, and got ready for bed. I asked my dad where all the furniture came from, and he told me that everything was left by the people before us. He raved at how everything was in such good condition he couldn't part with any of it. That night, it was so hard for me to sleep. The room was incredibly cold and I shivered under the blanket. At some point, I eventually fell asleep, but awoke curled into a ball near the end of the bed towards the door. I shuffled backwards from my position until my back touched something solid. I was completely frozen at that point. I didn't know who or what my back was touching in my bed, but I was too afraid to turn around. I could feel them move as they breathed in and out haggard breaths. At first I had a moment of relief as I thought it was probably my dad. But my dad would never go into bed with me like that unless I had asked him, and he was snoring loudly in his own bedroom. I didn't know what else to do but scream for my dad. He came rushing in and I sobbed when I saw him. "Someone's in my bed! Someone's in my bed!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I jumped onto the floor and looked at the bed, completely empty. My dad looked at me tired and confused. "There's no one here, baby girl. Are you okay? You having a bad dream?" I looked at him. He was confused as I was shocked. I didn't know what else to do, but I asked if I could sleep in his room. He was completely taken aback, but it was late, so he reluctantly agreed. Morning came and we talked about what happened the night before, but I didn't know either. My dad brushed it off as a simple nightmare, but the memory of the cold I felt on my back and the deep, heavy breathing were stuck in my head. The rest of the day came and went as we cleaned and ran errands. Night came and we were both exhausted after dinner, so my dad suggested we go to bed early for another rough day. My dad went into my bed. He had never done so before, and I know I was 10 at the time, but it's still embarrassing to have him check for monsters in my room. He assured me that everything was clear and kissed my forehead, wishing me to have good dreams. I was so tired from everything we did that day that I almost instantly fell asleep. It was probably only a couple of hours later when I awoke to the sound of that labored breathing beside me. It was a deep, almost gurgling inhale with a sickening crack as it exhaled. My back was touching what I think was a bare arm, and through my pajamas, it felt like my skin was going to freeze off. I felt the bed shift as the unknown body turned towards me. The horrific breathing was a blast of icy air onto the nape of my neck. I wanted to scream for my dad so badly, but I was frozen with fear. I was so afraid that I just felt dizzy and disoriented. I kept telling myself in my mind that it was just a dream, that it was all just a horrible nightmare, until I felt a stiff, cold hand tightly squeeze my right shoulder. It was so cold I felt my skin burn, and I finally let out a blood-curdling scream. I bolted towards the door. My body slammed into the wall, and I darted towards my dad's bedroom. He awoke to find me sobbing at the foot of his bed. He pulled me into a tight hug and assured me that everything was okay. I didn't know what to do, but my dad especially was forced into that horrible circumstance. As an adult, I can't imagine how my dad must have felt. With the death of my mother and my freakouts at night, I don't know how my dad kept it together. These terrors came to me almost every night, and my dad tried so hard to get me help. He got me a counselor with what little money he had, and he stayed up late some nights to make sure I was okay. Thankfully, my bed frame was tall, so I eventually started to sleep underneath my bed. It didn't fix the issue, though. At night, I would feel the mattress sink above me as I lay underneath the bed. The breathing was getting worse and worse. I had no idea what it was, and I was too afraid to confront it. I was losing so much sleep that when I finally went back to school, I would find any moment I could to be asleep. My dad got into a lot of trouble for me doing that, though. I cried every night to sleep, causing my dad so much heartache. But things eventually got worse as one day, my dad told me that he had to start third shifts due to staffing. That meant for at least a month or so my nights would be spent alone at home. I was depressed. I dreaded the moment until the night it finally came. My dad was so worried about leaving me home alone like that, but I showed a brave face to him. He left at 11 p.m., so I stayed up that night until he was gone and ran into his bedroom, locking the door behind me. Maybe if I wasn't in that bed, things would be better. Perhaps my nightmares fade away like the dreams they were. I went to sleep in the comfort of my father's bed until I woke up a couple of hours later to the sound of banging coming from the door. No, please, please! I begged for the nightmare to go away, but the sound of its breathing and the banging answered my cries. I crawled underneath my dad's bed and curled myself into a ball, trying to make myself smaller and smaller. The banging eventually stopped, but the breathing remained. I held my breath as I hoped for the nightmare to just fade away, until I heard the click of the lock on the door. I couldn't believe this was happening. I slowly turned so I could see the door from my hiding spot. I finally saw something. A pair of sickly pale feet were shuffling towards my spot in the darkness. I put my hands over my mouth to prevent a scream from escaping. The feet slowly crept closer towards me. I just prayed that my dad would come back. The breathing was more horrific this time. It sounded so sick as it moved through the bedroom towards my hiding spot. It finally made it towards the foot of the bed, and I heard the sound of something breaking. Its limbs cracked as it began to crouch onto its hands and knees. That's when its head began to peek underneath the bed, and I finally saw its face. It was my mom. Rather, it looked like my mom. All the features were there. Her medium-length blonde hair, her blue eyes, a button-like nose. We had shared all of these features, but what I saw in front of me was deformed. She was once tan and flush with color, was replaced with a deathly pale complexion. Her hair was ragged and thinning, her teeth blackened, and her eyes were scarlet and jutted out of their sockets. As she started to crawl underneath the bed, every joint was rigid and snapped as she moved. Her neck was bent, broken as I last remembered her. A couple of years before, my mother was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, a terminal disease that scars and thickens the lungs, making it harder and harder to breathe. My mother was bedridden, and while my dad was at work, she couldn't take the pain anymore. I was with her when she passed. I still remember it to this day. She looked at me with sorrowful tears filling her eyes, and she apologized. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Everything just hurts so much," my mom cried, but every breath she struggled to get the words out. "I promise I'll always be there for you, okay? Okay, baby." I nodded at her, but I was still so young that I didn't know what was going on. I watched my mother as she used all of her strength to lift herself up, climb the chair she had grabbed from the dining room, and stick her head through the little lasso she had made. She blew me a kiss as her body suddenly dropped, and she was suspended by the rope. My dad had returned home to the horrific scene a few hours later. I'm sorry," the voice croaked as she began to crawl underneath my dad's bed to get to me. I screamed and pushed myself deeper and deeper into my hiding spot until my back hit the wall. Her hands were stretching towards me. Her nails were broken and bloodied, and the joints of her fingers snapped as they moved. She finally made it to me and placed both cracking hands onto my face. The cold from her body was burning my face. She opened her lips to show a disgusting, toothy smile, and she began to choke as white foam poured out of her mouth. I cried. I cried and cried for my daddy to come and save me. I prayed for what felt like hours until I finally heard my dad rush into the house. I blinked, and of course my mother was gone. He came in and shouted my name desperately, and I warily revealed myself. He saw the state I was in. It must have looked the same as that day a couple of years before. He pulled me into a tight hug and tried his best to make it better. After that night, there was some sort of shift. It was very inconsistent, but she wasn't coming to me every night, but she still came. She would come to me randomly and fill my nights with horror even to this day. Even to this day, I fight the urge to crawl underneath my bed at night looking for rescue. It still frightens me when she appears, but I don't want to call an exorcist or something to get rid of her. I don't know why she does this. Maybe to keep her promise of being for me, perhaps? No one knows, but maybe, just maybe I can ask her myself. I've been having issues breathing lately, so I decided to get checked out. The diagnosis is pulmonary fibrosis. Just like her, just like my mom.